Arab art is one of the many various facets that make up the Arab world or Arab culture. Arab art should be seen in the same way that Arabic music is looked at, film, poetry, and all other forms of cultural production. Arab art, I think, is becoming more and more essential for us as we meet real-world challenges over the past few years that have threatened our ethnic diversity, that have threatened our identities in the Arab world. The fact that there are certain groups that do not want to see culture prosper and differences being celebrated. Arab art or art in general, whatever the ethnicity or the mantra that we like to look through, should be celebrated. And I think that it's becoming more and more important as time goes by. I think what contemporary art is a reflection of their identities. And for a person from the Levant, for example, what contemporary art could be is very different than for someone in the Gulf. And yet there's so much overlap. Contemporary art, I think, is a reflection of what is happening in today's history, whether it is the extremist groups that have emerged, whether it is the environmental challenges that we face, whether it is the political situations that we have faced over the past few years, and whether it is the beautiful things that we celebrate as well amongst us. Everything from food to music that bring us all together, I think, are reflected in a lot of works by artists in the Arab world. So Arab art really is a vehicle from which we can express ourselves and be seen and be humanized. I would look at Arab art emergence from the mid-19th century onwards. For me, the peak of what I regard as Arab art was the 1950s and 60s. The reason I look at these 2 decades was that most Arab states had won their independence or had fought for their independence from colonial rule. And so there was a very strong push, not only from society at large for an individual identity that is counter to the foreign imposed identities, but also through the nation state itself, through the government itself. Over the past 6 or 7 decades, many governments in the Arab world attempted to use art to influence the populations. We've seen the governments of Iraq, for example, and even in Syria, invite a lot of famous artists and architects to create monuments for Iraqis and Syrians as well. But in the case of Iraq, they've invited artists, and they wanted to give the Iraqis a new sense of identity, a new sense of belonging, something that would bring all the Iraqis together. And that was the idea of this monument. And so we see the governments rely on artists to create this idea of a common identity for the entire country. So can art influence countrymen? Can art influence citizens? I believe yes, art can influence citizens. The reason I collect art from the Arab world is the fact that this is the art that's under threat in the world. The fact is that other countries that I appreciate, whether it was India, Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, these countries' art movements and artistic treasures are not as under threat as the Arab world. The fact is that the Arab world is seeing a huge change in its demographics. The fact is that the Arab world has seen in the past 2 decades a number of wars. The fact is that we've seen foreign occupation, complete disregard to our own history and our own museums. Just in the Iraq war in 2003, several thousand works disappeared. The same thing happened with other countries that have witnessed civil wars or conflicts. So we have to safeguard our own history, because these works are national treasures. And I feel that it saddens me when they leave our region, because then Our own populations don't get to experience the diversities that these countries included just a few decades ago. Because of my own individual subjective interest, I always look at Arab art from a political lens. That even when I look at works that are landscapes, even when I look at portraits or works that are abstract, I always wonder what the political background was when that artist created his or her work. I always think, oh, was it done in 1967? Was the shadow of the war in any way looming? Was it done in the 1950s? Was that the age of Arab nationalism? Are there any metaphors or allegories that I should look out for? So this does not in any way mean that the work is political, but because of my own personal interest in modern Middle Eastern history, I always look at the artwork through a political lens. Over the past few years, I have noticed that there is a strong connection between many artworks and artists and between the political environment in which they created the work. In a contemporary sense, we see a lot of works created by artists who left the Arab world because of political conflict. But if you go back several decades, a lot of the artists were creating work as a response to political developments, whether these were internal or external. And in fact, even going back to the 1940s, whether it was the occupation of Palestine in 1948, a lot of artists across the region reacted to that. Then you look at 1956, the tripartite aggression against Egypt. Artists reacted to that. The 1967 war, the 1973 war, the Iran-Iraq war, the 1991 Gulf War, the 2003 war. So unfortunately, all these political conflicts have been reflected in a lot of the artists' work. It's very challenging to name the most important artworks in the Arab world, but I might share with you a couple that I think that were very important. One of the works I think of is Jawad Salim's mother and child sculpture, which I can say I'm very proud that I was the underbidder at auction for that work. It is a sculpture that reflects motherhood and the very delicate connection between a mother and the child. And I think that that is a work that is quintessentially Iraqi. Another work that I think of is a work we have in our collection, or that series of works. I think Marwan, who was a Syrian artist who passed away in 2016, in the 1970s started depicting faces of human beings in a landscape style, and what he called sort of a topography of the soul. And I think this is a genre that has not been attempted before in art history. Although people draw parallels with other art movements, but I feel like that is unique to Marwan. So we need to be proud of our own histories, our own schools, and our own movements in art.